Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. Today we are looking at a shocking crime that took place in Northern Ireland back in May 2000. Lisburn is a city situated about 8 miles southwest of Belfast. Back in 2000, 2 years before the area was given city status, it was seen as a good town to live in. Crime rates were low. Many of the occupants commuted to nearby Belfast, and the area in which today's crime took place, Audley Avenue, was a typical area in the town filled with semi-detached houses, many of which contained young families. It was here that Paul Gault and his childhood sweetheart, Lesley Ann, decided to raise their family. Lesley had given birth to triplets, Catherine, Claire and Jonathan, in 1995, and a short article appeared in the local press celebrating their birth. Paul was very much a family man who spent as much time with his young family as he could. He worked as a manager at a local transport company, whilst Lesley worked as a civilian member of staff at the Seymour Street fire station. They were friendly people, got on well with their neighbours, and were just a typical young couple raising a family together. It was on Friday the 19th of May 2000 that this apparently idyllic lifestyle disintegrated. Paul and Lesley were due to have a weekend away at the Killyhevlin Hotel in Enniskillen. Paul's parents were going to look after the triplets so that the couple could have a break together. On the morning of the 19th, Paul accompanied Lesley on the school run, something which he rarely got to do as he would usually be at work. The couple dropped their children at school and returned home just before 9 a.m. Paul went inside the house to pack for their trip, whilst Lesley ran some errands at the bakery and pharmacy, filled the car with petrol, and then went to visit her parents. She returned home at approximately 11 a.m. and then went to enter the house by the back door as she normally would. However, when she got there, she saw that the window had been smashed and the door forced open. The kitchen had been ransacked. Terrified, Lesley went to get her neighbour, who called the police to inform them that there had been a break-in at Lesley and Paul's home. The two of them returned to Lesley's house, where the neighbour started to look for Paul. When he went upstairs, he came across a horrific scene in the master bedroom. The room was covered with blood spatter from the floor to the ceiling. 34-year-old Paul was clearly dead. He was in the corner of the room, sitting, slumped forward in a large pool of blood. The neighbour returned downstairs where Lesley was waiting and called the police for a second time, this time to say that there had been a murder. Within minutes the police had arrived. Whilst an initial look at the crime scene would hint that Paul had interrupted a burglary and had been killed in a random attack, it was soon clear to the experienced officers that this was not the case. A complicated investigation followed, which paid particular attention to the new forensic methods and would go on to uncover a trail of deceit which proved that this was a premeditated attack by someone laying in wait in the bedroom of Paul and Lesley's home. The investigators immediately began to look into Paul's life, and this started with canvassing those who knew him. After speaking to his neighbours, a common theme emerged. Many mentioned the fireman who would regularly visit Paul and Lesley's home. One neighbour gave the police the registration number of the fireman's white Vauxhall Cavalier. This was traced and found to be owned by the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service. It didn't take long before it was established that this vehicle had been allocated to Assistant Divisional Fire Officer Gordon Graham, who was based at the Seymour Street fire station, the same place where Lesley worked. Within hours of the murder, the police knew that Lesley and Gordon had been having an affair. They had met in December of 1997, struck up a friendship which quickly evolved into an intense affair. It was well known at the fire station that the two had begun a relationship. They were described as being consumed with each other to the point that they were blinded to the reality of life and the feelings of other people involved. Gordon was also married with 3 children. Gordon and Lesley had been reprimanded at work after being caught in a state of undress at a fire department function, but the majority of their liaisons took place at Lesley and Paul's home, with Gordon often arriving just minutes after Paul left for work for the day. The police went to visit Gordon and said that they were investigating the murder of Lesley's husband. He did not seem shocked and remained very calm when being spoken to. He spoke openly of his affair with Lesley, and when his locker at the fire station was searched, the police found 11 love letters between the pair in which they spoke of their undying love for one another. The police asked where Gordon had been that morning. Gordon could provide a clear account of his whereabouts. After arriving at work and firing up his computer, he began working on some questions for a quiz. He then visited the main shopping area in town, Bow Street, where he walked up and down looking for a gift for his wife before going to pay a bill. Gordon was happy to hand over the clothes that he was wearing to the police for further investigation. He seemed relaxed, almost cocky, despite being spoken to by the police in connection with a murder. Meanwhile, Paul's colleagues said that they had noticed a marked change in his behaviour in the few weeks leading up to his death. He had been miserable, crying at work and storming out, until his mood began to pick up when he said he was going away for the weekend. Lesley admitted to the police that she had been having an affair with Gordon. She said that Paul had become aware of the affair on the 1st of May, which would tie in with his changed demeanour at his place of work. According to Lesley, Paul overheard her on the phone to Gordon. This was the first Paul knew of the affair. Lesley claimed that once her husband found out about her relationship with Gordon, she decided to end the affair and concentrate on her marriage. The planned weekend away was an attempt to get things back on track. In a second call on the 1st of May, Lesley alleged that Paul had spoken to Gordon, telling him that the affair with his wife was over, adding that she would be staying with him and that he had won. The letters in Gordon's locker at the fire station told a different story. It was clear that Gordon did not want the relationship to end, and did not believe that it would, just because Paul had found out about it. In the letters he would say things such as, "Let me plan our escape, and soon, my love, we will escape the things that temporarily trap us. We will never regret the step we're about to take." Whilst there was a great deal of motive, the police needed to prove that it was this love affair that would eventually lead to Paul's murder. With careful analysis of the scene and new forensic techniques, they were able to do so. To the police, it was clear from day one that the crime scene had been staged. There were just too many things that didn't add up. Paul had been found in the corner of the master bedroom. There was a huge amount of blood. He had been bludgeoned in a vicious attack until his head caved in. He was in a seated position with his head slumped forward. There was a hammer and a hockey stick nearby, which were presumed to be the murder weapons. If working on the theory that Paul had disturbed a burglar when he got home, the glass in the back door would have already been smashed, and Paul would have walked through it when he entered the house. However, there was no glass found on his shoes. Similarly, if the burglar was already there when Paul arrived home, why did the forensics show that the attack had only happened in the corner of the main bedroom? It is very unlikely that Paul would walk into what he knew to be a dangerous situation and position himself into the corner of the room. If the burglar came into the home after Paul was in the bedroom packing, why would Paul not react to the glass on his back door being broken and simply continue to pack for the weekend trip? How would the burglar still manage to surprise and kill Paul, trash the house, and gather belongings? The jewellery box in the bedroom was open, but there was jewellery placed on top of the blood showing that it had been moved after the murder. This indicated staging of the scene rather than a burglar who had never planned to kill and wanted to make a quick escape. Additionally, a sports bag was found that was filled with items that were presumably about to be stolen, but they were all quite cheap and random, like basic crystal glasses and a PlayStation. There was certainly nothing worth killing for in the bag. The crime scene did not tally with that of a disturbed burglary, and Gordon became the prime suspect. However, the fact that Gordon and Lesley had readily admitted that they had an affair which took place in the room where the murder occurred meant that DNA indicating Gordon's presence would be expected. In a strange coincidence, the police were able to narrow down the time of death to a 10-minute window. Paul's adjoining neighbour, whose bedroom shared a wall with Paul's bedroom, was hanging a picture at the exact time of the murder. The neighbour was literally inches away as the murder took place and remembers hearing a disturbance and looking at the digital clock in his bedroom. It said 9:00 something, making the police aware that the murder had taken place after 9 a.m. but before 9:10 that morning. They used this knowledge to more closely inspect Gordon's alibi. They knew the time that Gordon had switched on his computer at work and when he had made the credit card transaction to pay a bill. In the time in between, he said that he had been in Bow Street shopping for a present for his wife. The police reviewed the CCTV footage from all of the stores on Bow Street, and Gordon did not appear on any of the footage. He had been tripped up by his own alibi. The forensic examination went on to find microscopic fragments of glass that would not be visible to the naked eye in Gordon's shirt pocket. Additionally, there was a lump of glass in the tread of his shoe. These were analysed and found to be a match to the glass from the smashed back door. The sports bag found filled with goods at the scene was also analysed. From the blood staining on the bag, it was determined that the bag had been flattened at the time the blood had got onto it. Therefore, the stolen goods had been added after the murder. Gordon was asked about the bag, and he said that he had never seen it before. However, forensics were able to link him to the bag through analysis of sweat particles using something called low-count DNA. It established that Gordon had been holding the bag and that there was a 1 in a billion chance that the DNA did not belong to him. In order for Gordon to successfully lie in wait for Paul, he would have needed to know that Paul would have been doing the school run that day rather than being at work as he normally would have. That would give Gordon a window of time to get in position before attacking Paul. He would also need to have known when Paul would have been alone in the house so he could plan when to strike. With all this in mind, both Gordon and Lesley were arrested on the 20th of June 2000 and charged with Paul's murder. Lesley was released on bail whilst Gordon was held in custody. Whilst Gordon was on remand awaiting his trial, his household phone was tapped, and during one conversation with his wife, she was heard saying, "How stupid could you be to use your own bag?" Gordon and Lesley had a joint trial at Belfast Crown Court. They both pleaded not guilty to murder. Despite their supposed undying love, they did not acknowledge each other during the course of the trial. Gordon appeared cocky and demonstrated no emotion, whereas Lesley sat with her head down, looking ashamed, and particularly embarrassed when their love letters were read aloud to the court. The prosecution had a mountain of evidence against Gordon and argued that Lesley had conspired with him to kill Paul, and that she had been the one who arranged the logistics of the attack. The defence countered that the affair had ended and that Gordon could have found out all of the pertinent information without the need for Lesley's participation. At the end of the trial, Gordon was convicted by a unanimous verdict and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years, which was later reduced to 18 years. He was branded a brutal and merciless killer by the trial judge. However, the jury failed to reach a unanimous verdict about Lesley's guilt, and as such she would have to face a second trial. At this second trial, based on the same evidence as the first, Lesley said how she hated Gordon and that it was him who had always pursued her. However, it was noted in court that despite the claims of the affair being over, Lesley had been in contact with Gordon by phone on the same day as she laid her husband to rest. Lesley went on to state that while she had no part in the murder, she felt morally responsible as it was her affair with Gordon that had been the catalyst for the killing. After the jury deliberated, they found Lesley guilty of murder and she broke down in court as she was given a life sentence. Paul's parents, Paddy and Carol Gault, said that they always believed that Lesley was guilty of being heavily involved in their son's death and that they planned to try to get permanent custody of the triplets. Lesley appealed against her conviction on a number of different points, with all but one of these being dismissed. However, Lesley was granted a third trial on the basis that the judge had misdirected the jury as to the state of mind necessary to constitute the applicant as an accessory to murder. While she was in prison waiting for her third trial to start, Lesley became involved in another relationship. Both Lesley and a second woman, Julie McGinley, who was in prison after being convicted of beating her husband to death whilst he slept, were at the centre of a scandal where prison officers had become involved in sexual relationships with female inmates. A married prison officer, Stanley McCartan, was found to have love letters linking him to Lesley in his locker, and phone records established approximately 130 calls made between the two of them. Stanley would lose his job as a result of this affair, after which he moved into Lesley's home. The relationship broke down shortly after that. Lesley's third trial went ahead based upon the same evidence as the first two trials. After the jury deliberated, Lesley was found not guilty of Paul's murder. The verdict was met with shock and Lesley had to speak to her lawyer to clarify the verdict. Paul's father and brother left the court immediately without making any comment, knowing that this verdict would mean that the woman they believed was responsible for their loved one's death would now be the one who would raise his children. Lesley did not talk as she left court a free woman, but later released a statement through her solicitor stating that she had lived through a nightmare that was almost unimaginable, that she had been bereaved, imprisoned, vilified and separated from her children. The detective who headed the investigation, Superintendent Roy McComb, said he accepted that the legal process had taken its due course and the acquittal brought the inquiry to an end. Lesley became a born-again Christian and went on to marry Jeremy Burke in 2008 after meeting at a local church. In 2017, they left Northern Ireland to head up the newly established Lakelands Elim Church in County Leitrim. Gordon was released from prison in 2021 after completing his sentence. That concludes today's story. Please consider subscribing and add any comments down below. It's petty crime time now. Karen from Texas has sent in her rabbit, Benny Bun Bun, an indoor free-range rabbit who even plays in cat tunnels. He supervises Karen when she is working from home. Benny is 3.5 years old and likes construction workers that visit but hates salesmen. I guess it's something to do with salesman's aftershave. And then we have Dr. Cheryl. For those of you petty crimers that can cast their mind back to Halloween cats, Sam and Mary. Sadly, they've crossed the Rainbow Bridge now. Dr. Cheryl has adopted new cats now. So we have Ozymandias, mainly called Ozzy, and Castoria. So Ozzy is the black fuzzball and Castoria is the diluted tortie. Ozzy's an adventurer and Castoria is a little bit shy, but they have both brought a lot of happiness to Dr. Cheryl's home. If you would like your pet featured on Petty Crime, please send me an email to thecrimereel@gmail.com and give me some details and photos or videos. Thanks very much for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. If you're here listening to me within the first few hours of launch, I'm probably in the air flying to Gran Canaria. So I'm just going away for a few days. So my puss today is, where are you going on holiday this year? Or where have you been? Thanks again for listening to me. Goodbye.